The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields of New Eden as Jake Morrison walked through the colony's main street. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and the sweet scent of blooming flowers that lined the walkways. Children ran past him laughing as they hurried to school, while their parents waved from doorways before heading to work. This was home for 50,000 humans who had traveled across the stars to build something beautiful on this distant world. Jake stopped at the central plaza where the fountain bubbled peacefully. The water came from underground springs that the first settlers had discovered 3 years ago when they landed on this green planet. Back then, there had been only a few hundred brave souls willing to leave Earth and make the long journey to the outer rim of known space. Now, New Eden was a thriving community with farms that stretched to the horizon and a research center that studied the amazing plants and animals they shared this world with. Dr. Lisa Grant emerged from the research building carrying a sample case and waved to Jake as she headed toward her lab. She had been studying the local wildlife for 2 years and never seemed to run out of new discoveries. Just last week, she had found a type of flower that could predict weather changes by changing colors. The children loved visiting her lab to see the strange creatures she kept in glass containers and to hear her stories about life on other worlds. The colony had everything they needed to live well. The farms produced enough food to feed everyone with plenty left over to trade with, the occasional merchant ships that stopped by. The mining operation in the eastern hills brought up metals and minerals that Earth needed for building new ships. The medical center kept everyone healthy, and the school taught the children everything they would need to know about life among the stars. Jake made his way to the administration building where he spent his days making sure everything ran smoothly. As colony administrator, he had to approve supply requests, settle disputes between neighbors, and plan for the future growth of New Eden. It was not an easy job, but he loved seeing how the community grew stronger each day. The people here had left behind everything they knew on Earth to build something new, and they worked together like a big family. The communication center buzzed with activity as messages came and went between New Eden and other human colonies, scattered across this part of the galaxy. Earth felt very far away, but they were not alone out here. Dozens of other settlements had been established in recent decades as humans spread out among the stars. Some were mining operations on rocky worlds, while others were research stations studying alien technology. New Eden was special because it was one of the few places where humans could build a real home with families and farms and all the things that made life worth living. Ryan Parker worked in the engineering section, making sure the power systems and water treatment plants kept running. He had been born on Earth, but came to New Eden as a young man looking for adventure. Now he had a wife and 2 children who had never seen their home world, but considered this green planet the only home they needed. Ryan often said that humans were meant to explore and build new places, and that New Eden proved they could make any world into a paradise if they worked hard enough. Maria Santos taught at the school, where she helped children learn about mathematics and science and history. Many of her students had been born on New Eden and knew more about this world than about Earth. She made sure they understood where humans came from and how they had traveled to the stars, but also taught them to love the world they lived on now. The children were curious about everything and asked endless questions about the aliens they might meet someday and the other worlds humans had discovered. Danny Walsh ran the security office, but there was not much crime to worry about in a place where everyone knew their neighbors. His job was mostly helping people who got lost in the wilderness or making sure the landing pad was safe when supply ships arrived. Sometimes he had to break up arguments between people who disagreed about how things should be done, but violence was almost unknown on New Eden. People had come too far and worked too hard to waste time fighting with each other. The evening brought families together for dinner, and neighbors gathered in the plaza to share stories and make music. The older people talked about Earth and the journey to this world, while the younger ones made plans for tomorrow and next year and the decades to come. Children played games under the streetlights while parents watched and remembered their own childhoods on distant worlds. This was the life they had all dreamed of when they decided to leave everything behind and traveled to the stars. In her laboratory, Dr. Grant worked late into the night studying samples from the deep caves that honeycombed the hills around the colony. The rock formations contained unusual minerals that seemed to have properties she had never seen before. The miners who brought up the samples said there were vast deposits of these crystals deep underground, but they had been focusing on the more common metals that Earth needed. Grant made notes about requesting a geological survey to map the full extent of these mysterious formations. The crystals glowed with a soft blue light and seemed to store energy in ways that current human technology could not explain. She had sent reports to Earth describing her findings, but the scientists there were too busy with their own projects to pay much attention to rocks from a farming colony on the edge of nowhere. Grant knew she had discovered something important, but she would need better equipment and more time to understand exactly what these crystals could do. Jake Morrison finished his daily reports and prepared to send them to Earth on the next communication. Burst. Everything was peaceful on New Eden, with crop yields above expectations and no major problems to report. The population was growing steadily as new families arrived on supply ships, and children were born to parents who had never imagined they would raise their families among alien stars. In his report, Jake requested additional medical supplies and educational materials for the growing school, but nothing urgent or unusual. The supply ship from Earth was not due for another 6 months, but Jake had learned to plan ahead for everything the colony might need. The people of New Eden were resourceful and could make or fix almost anything, but some items could only be obtained from the home world. Medicine was especially important because they could not take chances with diseases or injuries so far from the nearest hospital. The communication delay alone meant that asking for help from Earth would take months, even if someone could send it immediately. As the night settled over New Eden, the lights in homes and buildings created a warm glow that could be seen from space. Anyone looking down from orbit would see a small cluster of human civilization, surrounded by vast wilderness on a world that had never known intelligent life before. The colonists slept peacefully in their beds, dreaming of the future they were building together on this distant world that had become their home. None of them knew that other eyes were watching from the darkness beyond their world. None of them suspected that their peaceful existence had attracted attention from beings who saw them not as brave pioneers, but as obstacles to be removed. The children who laughed and played in the streets had no idea that their laughter had been heard by creatures who understood only conquest and death. The quiet before the storm was ending, though the people of New Eden would not know it until the morning brought fire from the sky. The first explosions came with the dawn light, as plasma beams from orbit turned the outer farms into burning craters. Jake Morrison had just stepped outside his home when the sky erupted in streaks of deadly fire that fell like rain across the peaceful fields where children had played the day before. The ground shook with each impact as buildings vanished in flashes of superheated gas that left only glass and ash where families had been sleeping moments earlier. The attack came without warning or demand for surrender. The alien ships that appeared in the morning sky began their bombardment immediately, as if the 50,000 humans below were nothing more than insects to be exterminated. Jake ran toward the school where children would be arriving soon, but The building exploded in front of him as a plasma beam punched through the roof and melted everything inside. The heat wave knocked him backward, and when he struggled to his feet, he saw small bodies scattered across the playground where swings still moved in the wind. Dr. Lisa Grant was in her laboratory when the bombing started and immediately understood that this was not an accident or a misunderstanding. She had studied enough alien species to recognize a military assault when she saw one and knew that whoever was attacking had planned this carefully. Her hands shook as she activated the emergency communication system and began recording a message. That might be the last words anyone on New Eden would ever speak to the rest of humanity. The message was short and desperate as explosions shook the building around her. She described the attack and begged Earth to remember what happened here and to make sure the people who did this would pay for their crimes. The transmission lasted only 30 seconds before a plasma beam vaporized the communication tower, but the automated systems managed to compress her words into a tight beam that shot toward Earth at the speed of light. Enemy dropships descended through the smoke and flame to land near the colony center where survivors might be hiding. The ships were sleek and angular with a design that spoke of a military culture that valued efficiency over mercy. From their bellies came soldiers in powered armor that moved with deadly precision as they began hunting down anyone who had survived the orbital bombardment. These aliens showed no interest in taking prisoners or negotiating surrender. Jake Morrison saw them coming and gathered as many children as he could find to lead them toward the mining tunnels where they might have a chance to hide. The kids were crying and asking for their parents, but Jake knew there was no time to look for anyone else. Behind them, the aliens moved methodically through the burning streets, shooting anything that moved with weapons that turned human bodies to vapor in seconds. The creatures in the armor were tall and lean with 4 arms that let them carry multiple weapons at once. Their movements were controlled and professional like soldiers who had done this many times before on other worlds. They communicated through electronic signals that created a buzzing sound as they coordinated their sweep through the colony. To them, this was just another day of work, clearing an obstacle from their path. Ryan Parker had been checking the power plant when the bombing started and found himself trapped as the building collapsed around him. He crawled through twisted metal and broken concrete, while explosions continued to shake the ground above. When he finally reached the surface, he saw his neighborhood had become a wasteland of smoking craters where his friends and neighbors had lived. His own house was gone, and there was no sign of his wife and children among the debris. The pain of loss hit him like a physical blow, but there was no time to grieve as enemy soldiers appeared at the end of the street. Ryan dove behind a wrecked vehicle and watched as they executed a family that had survived in their basement. The aliens shot the parents first and then calmly turned their weapons on the children who tried to run. Their efficiency was terrifying because it showed this was planned genocide rather than the heat of battle. Maria Santos was leading a group of students toward the emergency shelters when the dropships landed nearby. She pushed the children into a drainage pipe and told them to crawl toward the mining complex while she tried to distract the alien soldiers. The kids were too scared to argue and disappeared into the darkness while Maria ran in the opposite direction, shouting and waving her arms to draw attention away from their hiding place. The aliens caught her within minutes, but instead of killing her immediately, they seemed curious about her behavior. One of them spoke in a harsh electronic voice, asking why she had not tried to save herself instead of the young ones. When Maria refused to answer, they shot her legs to keep her from running, and continued their questions about human psychology and social structure. They were gathering intelligence about their enemy, even as they murdered them. Danny Walsh had managed to reach the security office and was trying to coordinate evacuation efforts when he realized the communication systems were dead. The aliens had jammed all frequencies to prevent calls for help, and the orbital bombardment had destroyed most of the infrastructure anyway. He gathered what weapons the colony had, but they were designed for dealing with wild animals rather than military assault, and would be useless against powered armor. The mining tunnels became the last refuge for anyone who could reach them alive. The underground passages stretched for kilometers beneath the hills, and had multiple entrances that were hard to target from orbit. Ryan Parker arrived first, followed by Jake Morrison, with a group of children and then others who had managed to escape the slaughter above. They sealed the entrances behind them and retreated deep into the earth, where the alien sensors might not be able to find them. In the darkness beneath the ground, 847 humans huddled together while their world burned above them. They had no food or water except what they carried and no communication with the outside universe. The air was thick with dust and the smell of fear while children cried for parents who would never answer. These were the last survivors of New Eden, and they knew their time was running out. Dr. Grant had managed to reach the tunnels before her laboratory was destroyed, but she was badly burned from the heat of nearby plasma strikes. She used her knowledge of biology to help treat the wounded with whatever medical supplies they had salvaged, but there was little she could do for the most serious injuries. Many of the survivors would not live long enough to see rescue even if help was coming. The aliens above seemed to know about the tunnels because they began sealing the entrances with fusion charges that melted the rock into solid barriers. They were patient and thorough as they worked to ensure no one could escape from the underground tomb they were creating. The survivors could hear the explosions and feel the ground shake as their last connections to the surface world were cut off one by one. Jake Morrison gathered the remaining leaders to discuss their options, but everyone knew they had none. Yathose, air in the sealed tunnels would only last a few days, and the aliens would be gone long before anyone from Earth could possibly arrive to help. All they could do was try to make the children comfortable and hope that someone would eventually find their bodies and understand what had happened here. Ryan Parker worked with the mining equipment to try digging new passages, but the rock was too hard, and they did not have enough time or power to reach the surface. The drilling machines had been designed for extracting minerals rather than emergency escape, and made too much noise that might attract attention from above. They were trapped beneath kilometers of stone with no way out and no hope of rescue. The alien soldiers finished their work on the surface and returned to their ships, leaving behind a world that had been transformed from a garden into a graveyard. The orbital bombardment had sterilized most of the land, while the ground assault had eliminated any trace of human presence above ground. In a single morning, 50,000 people had been reduced to ashes and memories as the enemy fleet prepared. To leave, they deployed automated systems to monitor the planet and ensure no one escaped from the underground refuge. These machines would watch for any sign of life and eliminate it immediately if the survivors somehow managed to break free. The aliens were taking no chances that anyone might live to tell other humans what had happened on New Eden. In the depths of the tunnels, the survivors faced their final hours, knowing they had witnessed the end of their world. Some prayed while others held their loved ones close and tried to comfort the children who would never see the sun again. The peaceful colony that had been their home was gone forever, and soon they would join their friends and neighbors in death. But unknown to them, Dr. Grant's desperate message was already racing through space, carrying word of the massacre to ears that would hear it and hearts that would burn for vengeance. The message from Dr. Lisa Grant took 18 months to reach Earth, traveling through the vast emptiness between stars at the speed of light. When the transmission finally arrived at the Deep Space Communication Station on Luna, the technician, who received it, thought at first that it was some kind of training exercise or fictional drama. No one could believe that an entire human colony had been wiped out by alien attackers in a matter of hours, without any provocation or warning. Admiral Peter Collins was in his office reviewing fleet deployment reports when the emergency alert reached his desk. The message from New Eden had been authenticated and verified by 3 separate departments, and there was no doubt that it was real. As he watched the grainy footage of children running from plasma fire and families being gunned down in the streets, something cold and hard formed in his chest where his heart used to be. The images spread through human space like wildfire as news networks picked up the story and broadcast it to every colony and station in the solar system. People who had never heard of New Eden suddenly found themselves staring at footage of the massacre while reporters tried to explain how 50,000 innocent civilians had been murdered by unknown aliens. The reaction was immediate and visceral, as humans everywhere felt their peaceful assumptions about the galaxy shatter like glass. Captain Alex Turner was commanding a patrol ship near the Jupiter orbital platforms when he received the transmission. He had served in the Space Navy for 15 years dealing with pirates and smugglers, but had never seen anything like the systematic extermination that played out on his screen. The alien soldiers moved with mechanical precision as they hunted down survivors, and the orbital bombardment showed a level of military planning that spoke of experienced killers rather than random raiders. On Mars, the military command structure went into emergency session as General Karen Hayes reviewed what little intelligence they had about the attackers. The alien ships showed technology that was roughly equivalent to human capabilities, but their tactics were those of a species that had practiced genocide many times before. The careful coordination between orbital and ground forces suggested a military culture that specialized in the complete elimination of enemy populations. Dr. Amy Bell worked in the xenobiology department on Earth, where she studied all known alien species and their capabilities. When the footage from New Eden reached her laboratory, she began the painstaking work of analyzing every detail that might identify the attackers. The powered armor showed design elements that matched certain aggressive species from the outer rim, but she needed more information to make a positive identification. The political response came swiftly as the United Earth government convened an emergency session to address what many were calling the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. Representatives from every colony and station demanded immediate military action, while others called for diplomatic efforts to prevent further attacks. The debate raged for days as politicians struggled to understand how their peaceful expansion into space had suddenly become a fight for survival. Chris Stone worked in the Weapons Development Laboratory on Luna, where human engineers designed new technologies for exploring and defending human space. When he saw the footage from New Eden, he immediately began calculating what kinds of weapons would be needed to fight enemies who could destroy an entire colony in hours. The plasma bombardment showed energy outputs that exceeded anything in the current human arsenal and would require completely new approaches to warfare. The message from New Eden had included technical data about the attacking ships and their weapon systems that Dr. Grant had managed to record before her laboratory was destroyed. This information became the foundation for a massive intelligence effort as human scientists worked around the clock to identify the enemy and understand their capabilities. Every detail was analyzed and cross-referenced with known alien technologies. while diplomatic channels were open to allied species. Captain Turner found himself reassigned to a new fleet that was being assembled in secret at the shipyards orbiting Saturn. The ships were being retrofitted with experimental weapons and armor that pushed the boundaries of human engineering, while new training programs prepared crews for a kind of warfare that humans had never experienced before. The peaceful exploration fleet was being transformed into an instrument of war. The survivors from New Eden had been given up for dead, but long-range sensors detected faint life signs from beneath the surface of the devastated world. A rescue mission was organized immediately, and when the ships reached New Eden, they found 847 people still alive in the sealed mining tunnels. The survivors were barely breathing when they were found, and many died during the evacuation, but those who lived carried with them eyewitness accounts of the massacre. Ryan Parker was among the survivors, and his testimony provided crucial details about the alien soldiers and their methods. He described how they had shown no interest in negotiation or surrender and had killed children as efficiently as adults. The aliens seemed to view humans as a pest to be exterminated rather than an intelligent species worthy of any consideration. This was not a military action, but a deliberate act of genocide. Maria Santos had died in the tunnels, but not before recording her own account of the attack and her observations about alien psychology. Her final message described creatures that seemed to take pleasure in human suffering and showed signs of having done this many times before on other worlds. The implication was terrifying because it suggested that the attack on New Eden was part of a larger pattern of expansion through extermination. General Hayes used the survivor testimony to build a profile of the enemy that revealed a species with advanced military technology, but also serious vulnerabilities. The aliens seemed to rely heavily on superior firepower and had shown poor tactical flexibility when faced with unexpected resistance. Their rigid command structure might be exploited by human forces that were trained to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. The technological analysis revealed that the alien ships used energy systems based on exotic matter that could be disrupted by weapons designed specifically for that purpose. Chris Stone began developing new missile warheads and beam weapons that could penetrate alien defenses, while human shipyards started producing vessels designed for aggressive rather than defensive operations. The peaceful exploration fleet was being replaced by something far more dangerous. Dr. Bell finally identified the attackers as the Corvani Empire, a militant alliance of 4 alien species that had been expanding aggressively through the outer rim for decades. Intelligence reports from other species described a pattern of attacks similar to what happened at New Eden, with entire civilizations being wiped out to clear space for Corvani colonization. The Empire had been watching human expansion for years and had apparently decided that humans posed a threat to their plans. The United Earth government made a decision that changed the course of human history when they voted to authorize the formation of the Human Retribution Fleet and declared total war against the Corvani Empire. For the first time since leaving Earth, humans would unite behind a single military objective and commit all their resources to destroying an enemy that had proven it would show them no mercy. The age of peaceful exploration was over, and the age of human warfare had begun. Admiral Collins was placed in command of the new fleet with orders to locate and destroy every Corvani military installation within reach of human space. The rules of engagement were simple and brutal, with no provisions for prisoner exchange or diplomatic negotiation. The Corvani had chosen to treat this as a war of extermination, and humans would respond in kind until every last member of their species was dead or driven from the galaxy. Captain Turner took command of the HMS Retribution, a new class of warship, designed specifically for aggressive operations against alien targets. The ship carried weapons that could crack planets and defenses that could withstand anything the Corvani might throw at them. More importantly, it carried a crew that had seen the footage from New Eden and understood exactly what they were fighting. 4. The transformation of human space was remarkable, as every colony and station contributed to the war effort with a unity that had never been seen before. Manufacturing facilities that had produced consumer goods were converted to weapons production, while research laboratories focused entirely on developing new ways to kill aliens. The peaceful traders and explorers were becoming something that the galaxy had never seen before and would learn to fear. The survivors from New Eden were given places of honor in the new fleet as advisors and witnesses who could ensure that no one forgot why this war was being fought. Ryan Parker became a technical consultant, helping to design weapon systems, while the testimony of those who died in the tunnels was broadcast throughout human space to maintain the anger that drove the war machine forward. The Massacre had awakened. Something in humanity that had been sleeping since they left Earth, and now that monster was loose among the stars with 40 billion humans behind it, demanding blood for blood. The first battle came 6 months after the human retribution fleet departed Earth, when Captain Alex Turner led his squadron against a Corvani military outpost on the edge of their territory. The engagement began at maximum range with the aliens. Confident that their superior numbers and defensive positions would allow them to destroy the human ships before they could close to effective weapons range. They had not expected humans to fight like demons possessed by rage. Turner ordered his ships to ram speed and dove straight into the alien formation, while his crews fired everything they had at targets that grew larger by the second. The Corvani tried to retreat when they realized the humans were willing to sacrifice their own ships to destroy the enemy, but it was too late to escape. Human vessels exploded against alien hulls in brilliant flashes that lit up space, while surviving ships poured through the wreckage to hunt down anyone trying to flee. The HMS Retribution punched through the enemy defensive line and began targeting individual Corvani ships with weapons designed by Chris Stone to exploit their energy systems. The new plasma cannons tore through alien armor like paper, while missile salvos overwhelmed their point defense systems. But Turner was not satisfied with simply winning the battle and ordered his boarding parties to capture enemy survivors for interrogation. The human Marines who boarded the damaged Corvani ships showed the same systematic brutality that the aliens had used at New Eden. They moved through the corridors with cold efficiency, shooting down crew members who tried to surrender, and recording everything for broadcast back to Corvani space. The message was clear that humans had learned from their teachers and would show the same mercy that had been given to the children of New Eden. General Karen Hayes led the first ground assault against a Corvani colony world where intelligence suggested they were holding human prisoners from other attacks. The orbital bombardment that preceded the landing was precise and devastating, as human ships turned alien cities to rubble with the same plasma weapons that had been used against civilian targets. Hayes had studied the footage from New Eden frame by frame and made sure her forces copied every technique the aliens had used. The ground forces that landed on the Corvani world were equipped with powered armor that incorporated captured alien technology but improved with human engineering. The soldiers moved with deadly precision as they swept through the ruins, hunting for survivors, while automated systems recorded their actions for propaganda broadcasts. Every execution was filmed and every act of violence was documented to show the galaxy what happened to species that chose to massacre human civilians. Dr. Amy Bell had developed biological weapons specifically designed to target Corvani physiology based on samples recovered from the first battles. The weapons were deployed on breeding worlds, where the slow reproductive cycle of the enemy made them vulnerable to genetic attacks that would take generations to recover from. Entire bloodlines were wiped out by diseases that humans had engineered to be as cruel and lingering as possible. The Corvani Empire began to fracture as member species realized they were facing an enemy unlike anything they had encountered before. Humans fought with technological innovation, driven by pure hatred, and showed capabilities that exceeded anything in their previous intelligence estimates. The rigid military hierarchy that had served the Empire well against other enemies became a liability when facing opponents who adapted faster than orders could be transmitted. Captain Turner found himself promoted to Admiral as the human retribution fleet grew from dozens of ships to hundreds and then thousands, as every human colony contributed vessels and crews to the war effort. The manufacturing capacity of human space was devoted entirely to building weapons and ships, while research facilities worked around the clock to develop new ways to kill aliens. The peaceful trading networks were transformed into supply lines for the largest military machine the galaxy had ever seen. The Battle of Corvani Prime lasted 3 days as human fleets surrounded the enemy homeworld and began the systematic destruction of everything on the surface. The orbital bombardment was conducted with scientific precision as targeting specialists identified every military installation, government building, and population center for individual attention. General Hayes personally directed the targeting of schools and hospitals to ensure the aliens understood that humans had learned their lessons well. Chris Stone's new weapons turned the alien capital into a landscape of glass and ash while human ground forces hunted down survivors in the ruins. The Emperor of the Corvani Empire was captured alive and brought before Admiral Turner, who had traveled to the surface to witness the end of the species that had murdered his people. The execution was broadcast throughout human space and alien territories as a warning that genocide carried a price that would be paid in full. The 4 species that made up the Corvani Empire began surrendering individually as their alliance collapsed under the weight of human retaliation. The Zekthari were the first to abandon their allies and seek separate peace, but humans had no interest in negotiating with accomplices to genocide. Each member species was tracked down and systematically eliminated regardless of their attempts to distance themselves from the massacre at New Eden. Ryan Parker had been promoted to chief weapons designer and worked with Chris Stone to develop new technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics and morality. The orbital bombardment systems they created could sterilize entire continents in hours, while the biological weapons targeted specific genetic markers to ensure complete elimination of enemy bloodlines. The peaceful engineer who had once built water treatment plants was now designing instruments of species-wide extinction. The transformation of human military doctrine was complete as the fleet abandoned all pretense of following traditional rules of warfare. Prisoners were executed, rather than held while civilian populations were treated as legitimate military targets. The Geneva Conventions and other agreements that had governed human conflict for centuries were quietly abandoned as irrelevant to a war against species that had shown they would massacre children without hesitation. Admiral Turner stood on the bridge of his flagship as the last Corvani world burned beneath them and felt no satisfaction in the victory. The species that had destroyed New Eden was extinct, but the war machine that humans had built to accomplish that goal was too powerful. to simply turn off. Manufacturing facilities continued to produce weapons while research teams developed new instruments of destruction, and the fleet grew larger every day as more colonies contributed ships and crews. The other alien species in the galaxy watched, in growing horror, as humans demonstrated capabilities that surpassed their most advanced civilizations. The peaceful traders who had once been dismissed as primitive newcomers had transformed into something that threatened the established order of galactic civilization. Intelligence reports spoke of human fleets that could destroy star systems, and weapons that could eliminate entire species from existence. Dr. Bell received reports from deep space, monitoring stations that described human ships appearing at the edges of alien territories and conducting reconnaissance missions that violated every treaty governing interstellar relations. The fleet was no longer content to simply defend human space, but was actively seeking new targets among species that had supported the Corvani or failed to aid humans during the Massacre. The War of Vengeance was expanding into something far more dangerous. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions to discuss what they were calling the human problem, as reports arrived of entire star systems being sterilized by human fleets. The species that had once ignored human requests for trade agreements and mutual defense treaties suddenly found themselves facing the possibility that their own worlds might be next on the target list. The peaceful explorers had become apex predators and showed no sign of stopping their expansion. General Hayes commanded ground forces that had evolved beyond simple military operations into something resembling extermination squads. Her soldiers moved through conquered territories with the efficiency of machines, while automated systems documented their work for psychological warfare broadcasts. The footage was transmitted to every known alien civilization with the simple message that this was the price of threatening humanity. The survivors from New Eden, who had lived to see their people avenged, found that victory tasted like ashes in their mouths. Ryan Parker watched human fleets burn alien worlds and wondered if this was what his children would have wanted him to become. The peaceful colony they had built on New Eden seemed like a dream from another lifetime, while the reality was ships full of weapons designed to kill anything that was not human. Admiral Turner received intelligence reports indicating that several major alien civilizations were forming defensive alliances specifically to counter human expansion. The Galactic Council was openly debating military action to contain what they viewed as a rogue species that threatened galactic stability. The humans who had once sought acceptance among the stars had instead become the thing that alien nightmares were made of. The war machine showed no signs of slowing as new weapons came online, and additional fleets were commissioned to carry them to distant stars. The Corvani Empire was nothing but radioactive dust drifting through space, but the human retribution fleet continued to grow larger and more dangerous with each passing month. Admiral Alex Turner commanded over 10,000 ships carrying weapons that could crack planets and defenses that had proven immune to everything the galaxy could throw at them. The peaceful exploration fleet that had once carried colonists to distant worlds had become an instrument of destruction that threatened every living thing among the stars. The Galactic Council met in emergency session on the ancient world of Centaurus Prime, where representatives from 47 species gathered to discuss what they privately called the human problem. Ambassador Julie Foster represented humanity at the meetings, but she found herself facing delegates who looked at her with barely concealed fear and suspicion. The species that had once dismissed humans as primitive newcomers now spoke of them, in the same terms they used for natural disasters and cosmic threats. The Altarian representative displayed holographic images of human fleets conducting military exercises near their borders while practicing maneuvers that could only be described as preparation for planetary sterilization. The peaceful trading, vessels that had once carried human goods to alien markets, had been replaced by warships bristling with weapons designed by engineers who understood that the only good alien was a dead alien. Elder Vorthak of the ancient ethereal collective spoke for many when he described humans as a species that had evolved beyond the normal parameters of galactic civilization. Their capacity for both creation and destruction exceeded anything in the historical records, while their rate of technological advancement suggested they would soon possess capabilities that could threaten the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. The intelligence reports painted a picture of human space that resembled a vast military-industrial complex dedicated entirely to the production of warfare. Every colony had been converted to weapons manufacturing, while research facilities worked around the clock to develop new instruments of destruction. The birth rate had dropped dramatically, as families chose not to bring children into a society that existed only to feed the appetite of eternal conflict. Dr. Amy Bell had been appointed to the new Department of Xenocide, where human scientists studied alien biology for the specific purpose of developing more efficient ways to eliminate entire species. Her teams had created biological weapons that could target genetic markers unique to individual alien races, while her psychological warfare division designed propaganda that could drive enemy populations to mass suicide through carefully crafted fear campaigns. General Karen Hayes commanded ground forces that no longer bothered with occupation or pacification, but simply moved from world to world, leaving behind empty planets scoured clean of all complex life. Her soldiers had evolved beyond human recognition, as they incorporated alien technology and biological modifications that made them more efficient killers. The peaceful farmers who had once tended crops on frontier worlds now tended gardens of death across alien space. The economic analysis presented to the Galactic Council showed that human military spending had exceeded the gross domestic product of most member civilizations, while their weapons development programs were advancing at a rate that suggested they would soon possess technologies that could destroy star systems. The trade networks that had once carried goods between worlds now served only to supply the endless appetite of human war production. Captain Ryan Parker had been given command of a new class of ship designed specifically for what military planners euphemistically called population reduction operations. The vessels carried no ground troops or occupation forces, but instead mounted weapons that could sterilize entire continents from orbit in a matter of hours. The peaceful engineer who had once built infrastructure for colonial families now built machines designed to ensure that no alien children would ever threaten human space. The psychological profile compiled by the Council's xenopsychology experts described a species that had undergone fundamental changes since the massacre at New Eden. Humans showed signs of collective post-traumatic stress that had manifested as an obsession with eliminating all potential threats regardless of the actual danger they posed. The peaceful explorers had become paranoid exterminators who saw every alien species as a potential enemy that needed to be destroyed before it could threaten human civilians. Ambassador Foster found herself defending policies that she privately knew were monstrous but which seemed logical from a human perspective. When the Council demanded explanations for human attacks on neutral species, she calmly explained that neutrality during the Corvani massacre had been viewed as complicity and would be punished accordingly. Every species that had failed to aid humans during their darkest hour was now considered an enemy that needed to be eliminated. The Galactic Defense Force had been created in response to human expansion, but their ships were outdated, and their crews were trained for peacekeeping rather than total warfare. Human vessels had been designed from the beginning to fight and destroy, while alien ships were built for exploration and diplomacy. The technological gap was growing wider every day as human engineers focused entirely on developing better ways to kill, while aliens tried to adapt defensive systems for a kind of war they had never imagined. The vote came after 3 days of debate as representatives from across the galaxy struggled with a decision that would define the future of interstellar civilization. The motion was simple and direct, stating that humanity had become too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing, and that immediate action was required to eliminate the threat before humans developed capabilities that could threaten the entire galaxy. Elder Vorthak cast the deciding vote after describing humans as a cancer that would eventually consume everything if allowed to continue growing. The peaceful species that had once welcomed human traders and explorers now spoke of them as an existential threat that needed to be eliminated before they could spread beyond the reach of galactic civilization. The motion passed by a narrow margin, but it passed, and the galaxy committed itself to the destruction of humanity. Admiral Turner received word of the Council's decision while standing on the bridge of the HMS New Eden, the newest and most powerful vessel in the human fleet. The ship had been named in honor of the colony that started the war and carried enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. He read the formal declaration of war against humanity and felt no surprise because he had been expecting this moment since the first alien world burned under human weapons. The message was broadcast throughout human space, where it was received by populations that had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. Every human colony and station had been fortified, while weapons stockpiles had been hidden on worlds that appeared to be civilian targets. The species that had learned the cost of being unprepared for alien attack had ensured they would never be caught defenseless again. Chris Stone unveiled the final products of his weapons development program as human fleets prepared for a war that would determine whether humanity survived to see another century. The new ships carried devices that could ignite stars and weapons that could tear holes in space itself, while ground forces were equipped with armor that incorporated technologies reverse-engineered from a dozen different alien species. General Hayes addressed her troops through video links that connected every human military unit across the galaxy as they prepared for the greatest battle in the history of their species. She spoke of New Eden and the children who had died there while promising that every alien species would pay the price for the decision their leaders had made. The war machine that had been built for vengeance would now be used for survival. The survivors from New Eden stood with Admiral Turner on the bridge of his flagship as enemy fleets began moving toward human space from every direction. Ryan Parker looked out at the stars and remembered the peaceful colony where he had once raised his family while wondering if the children who died in the massacre would have wanted humanity to become what it had become. The peaceful farmers and engineers had been transformed into something that even they feared. Dr. Bell released the final biological weapons she had developed as a last resort for use against any species that threatened human extinction. The diseases were designed to be transmitted through space itself and would follow alien fleets back to their homeworlds where they would eliminate every form of complex life. The peaceful xenobiologist who had once studied alien life forms for scientific knowledge now possessed the tools to eliminate all alien life from the galaxy. The alien fleets that approached human space were the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, but they were facing an enemy that had spent years preparing for this exact scenario. Human defensive systems that had been hidden on seemingly peaceful worlds came online while weapons platforms that had been disguised as mining stations revealed their true purpose. The galaxy had united to destroy humanity, but humans had used that time to prepare for a war that would end with either their extinction or the extinction of everything else.